right. Hello, everybody. Thank you for the introduction. Thank you so much for inviting me to speak to all of you. I am excited to be here. We are going to talk about the role of psychophysiology and mindfulness in peak performance. This will be a fairly brief overview of a very big topic. I'm hoping that there will be some good questions at the end, and most importantly, I hope this will pique your curiosity for something to explore further as you go. So the first thing I'm going to ask you to do is imagine that you or a friend of yours has a really important challenge coming up, a really important performance. Perhaps, they're running a race or, they're performing in a concert or they're speaking in front of a big group of people, whatever that performance might be. Think about one piece of advice that you would give to that friend or to yourself as you're preparing for the performance. One thing that you would tell them to do in order to help them or yourself do your best. So I'll give you a few moments to think of what that would be. And then I'd love for somebody to just, shout it out. Tell me what that piece of advice would be. Breathe. Thank you. Perfect. Thank you. Focus on your strengths. Excellent. They're here. Have fun. Awesome. Anything else? Keep it simple. All right. Absolutely. Okay.
Sorry to interrupt. Do you mind if we use the mic as people are calling out answers?
Of course.
Thank you. So I'm happy to run it.
I think maybe we got most of the answers. Thank you. So I'm, clearly speaking to an audience that knows, what we're talking about here, because the one piece of advice that most people give in the situation is not something that you are all talking about. In a 2014 study, Alison Brooks asked this exact question to a whole bunch of people, around Boston and Cambridge. And 92% of respondents answered with some version of, in order to be at your best, you got to relax or calm down. And as we might know, that is actually not at all helpful. So attempts to relax or calm down prior to a performance, for one thing, not really possible. And second, not really in our best interest at all. So that same study went on to show that attempts to come down or relax, don't lead to improved performance. And what we need instead is to get excited about that performance. When we are excited, when we interpret the sensations of physiological activation as helpful, as adaptive, as excitement, then we perform better and we feel a whole lot better about our performance and about ourselves. There's a lot less shame, a lot less anxiety, a lot more feelings of competence and confidence. So that's really an important piece to keep in mind, that the way we interpret what's happening in the moment is really, really important. For one person, we might be stressed, somebody else might be seeing donuts, right? It's the way that we interpret what's happening in this moment is crucial to performance. And a lot of what we're going to be talking about today will stem from this concept. So rather than trying to relax prior to a performance, what can we do? We can get excited. I'm excited about being here. When I was, driving my way here, as my heart was beating a little faster and there were butterflies dancing and jiggling my stomach. What is it? I'm excited to be here. And my body is doing what it needs to be doing in order to help me do my best. Right? My body is preparing me. My body is helping me get ready in order to be here. There are certain types of performance for which we're not really excited about. Let's say you have a really important meeting with your boss, and there is just no way, you're getting excited about it because you have to have a really tough conversation. There's no way to get excited. But you can absolutely interpret those sensations of activation that you experience as readiness, being helpful, being adaptive. Right? So you have a choice. And you may be familiar with the Yorkes-Dodson curve that describes the relationship between physiological activation and performance. As you see here, when our activation is low, when we're super relaxed, performance is not so great, right? If I were super relaxed right now, I'd be under the lectern sleeping, right? I wouldn't be talking to all of you. We don't want to be relaxed, despite this pervasive myth that so many people subscribe to, that in order to be at our best, we got to relax. Well, we really don't. We have to land in that optimal sweet spot of activation that will maximize our performance. We don't want to be overactivated, right? We don't want to be on a downward curve of the inverted U. But the interesting part is that a lot of the time, people end up on that downward curve of the inverted U by trying to relax. Attempts to relax prior to a performance don't really work, or that's not what our bodies are trying to do. The body's trying to activate. Right. And then the mind comes in and goes, oh, no, this is not helpful. This is stressed. I got to relax. And then the mind and the body are butting heads. And that's how we often end up overactivated. And that impacts our performance in unhelpful ways. So what do we want to do? We want to help the body find that sweet spot of activation and be able to do that really well and all on its own. And this is where heart rate variability and breathing come in. And we're going to talk about those. And then the second step is the mind needs to let the body stay in that sweet spot of activation. And this is where mindfulness comes in. So this synergy between psychophysiology, as presented here through heart rate variability and breathing, and mindful approach to interpreting those physiological sensations is what's going to help us land in that optimal sweet spot of activation and, very importantly, stay there. So on the basis of this, I am going to introduce you to 6 principles of optimal performance. This is not all there is, of course, to optimal performance, but I think this would be a nice way to combine the concepts of psychophysiology and mindfulness and at least get us started in talking about that topic. So the first principle is the stop and smell the coffee principle, also known as mindful observation. The idea of mindfulness is probably very familiar to all of you. This is a word that has been a buzzword for many years, and there are so many different definitions of mindfulness. So I would like to present the definition that I use, so we're all on the same page. And this is the definition that fits, in my view, the best with psychophysiological approach that we're taking here. So mindfulness is pre-verbal awareness of the present moment with acceptance. This is the definition by Christopher Germer. The idea is that we become aware of the present moment right at the very beginning, before our minds kick in with labels and interpretations and suggestions and figuring out what to do. Just the experience itself. Learning how to let that experience be as it is, without a struggle, without pushing away from it. Belgian artist René Magritte has this beautiful piece that illustrates the relationship between experience and its interpretation. So this painting is called "This Is Not a Pipe." So if this is not a pipe, what is it? Anybody?
Picture of a pipe.
It's a picture of a pipe. Yes, thank you. And if we want to be even more precise, it's a projection of a picture of a pipe. But yes, it is a picture of a pipe. And yet, when you first looked at this picture, if I asked you, what is it? You would probably say it's a pipe, right? Because our minds jump to that interpretation right off the bat. We see something, the mind is very likely to go to the interpretation, skipping that pre-verbal awareness very, very quickly. We're so used to it, we're not even aware of the tendency of the mind to do that. And yet, when the artist was looking, it was painting this picture, we don't actually know what he was looking at. This is the interpretation of whatever was happening for him in the moment. He may have been looking at a pink unicorn with purple spots. We have no idea. But this is the interpretation of whatever was happening in his experience. And that is what we need to learn, is to be able to pause just long enough to become aware of the pre-verbal experience before the mind jumps in and does its thing. Because if we're able to pause in the moment, then we can direct the mind towards interpretations that are helpful to us, that will lead us in a helpful direction, as opposed to an automatic reaction that may not be terribly helpful, right? So, if you think about the sensations of physiological activation prior to performance, right? Your heart might be beating faster, your breathing is speeding up, maybe you're feeling a little sweaty, a little bit more agitated, maybe there are butterflies in your stomach. The automatic reaction is, this is stress, this is anxiety, this is bad, oh my God, I must get rid of this or else, right? That's what the mind jumps to. It's not really aware of the sensations itself. It goes directly to, I must make this stop. But if we actually stop and pause and pay attention to the sensations, then we have a choice. How are we going to interpret those sensations? And then we can choose to interpret them as readiness, as resilience, as excitement, as adaptive response, right? This is my body doing what it needs to do to help me do my best, right? And that is what we want to learn, to pivot to, without veering off into that unhelpful automatic reaction. We have a choice between what we can change and what we cannot change. The experience itself, right in this moment, it is what it is. We can't change it. But what we can change is our interpretation and our response to that experience. Now, moving on to principle number 2, the white bear principle. When people experience, that automatic reaction to physiological sensations that, they term as unhelpful, they try to stop them. I shouldn't be thinking this way. I shouldn't be feeling this way. I need to make this go away. Right? So people try to control what is actually uncontrollable. So the white bear principle, giving up control over the uncontrollable. Harvard psychologist Daniel Wegner did a study where he asked a bunch of people in a room to spend, I think he had, about 5 minutes. I'm not going to ask you to do that, but I'm going to ask you to spend about 10 seconds to not think about the white bear. This one. Don't think about it. Don't think about the white bear. How many white bears do we have running around? A whole bunch, right? We all know that attempts to control our thoughts, attempts not to think about something really don't work. Despite, really well-meaning advice that we hear all the time, and maybe sometimes even give ourselves, oh, it's okay, don't think about it, right? Do we actually know how to do that? Not really. Our minds are not capable to just stop thinking about a certain topic, right? And this study has been replicated with green monkeys and purple vehicles and things like that. And most of you have probably had this experience of trying not to think about something and just not being able to shut your mind off. It works the same way with feelings. Right? Again, we hear all the time the really well-meaning advice of, oh, it's okay. There's nothing to be scared of. Don't be anxious. How do we do that? I don't know how to do that. Do you know how to do that? It turns out that our minds are actually not capable of controlling our feelings either. So Roy Baumeister did a study a bunch of years ago at this point, where he had 2 groups of people watching a clip from the movie Terms of Endearment. And, if anybody has seen that movie, it's a tearjerker. It's, there's absolutely no way to watch it without crying your eyes out. And this particular scene is, a young mother is dying of cancer, saying goodbye to her children, right? It's just really sad. So both of these groups were instructed to watch the movie clip, and one was asked to watch the movie clip and, really do nothing in particular, have their emotions the way they are. And the second group was asked to control and suppress their emotional experience. Afterwards, both groups were asked to solve a difficult anagram puzzle. So first of all, people who were asked to control and suppress their emotional experience couldn't really do it. But most importantly, they failed a whole lot more at solving that puzzle than the group that was allowed to have their emotional experience as it was. So Roy Baumeister postulated that there is some sort of resource that's being drained by our attempts to control and suppress our emotional experience. Then his graduate student went on to try to figure out, what is this magical resource that we are wasting or using up in an attempt to control our emotional experience. So he conducted a similar study where he had groups of people watching a movie clip. It was a different movie clip. I think it was from a slaughterhouse or something equally horrible. Again, he had those groups of people, one having their emotional experience as it was, and the other one controlling and suppressing the emotional experience. And then they had to solve a difficult tracing task. It was actually an impossible tracing task. One of those where you have to you can't pick up your pencil from the paper, but you have to get from one point A to point B. It was actually not possible to do it, but this is what both groups were asked to do. And he measured people's blood sugar levels prior to watching the movie clip, and then again right after. And what he found was that, again, people who were attempting to control and suppress their emotional experience gave up on that impossible tracing task a whole lot sooner than the group that was allowed to have their emotional experience as it was. And their blood sugar levels, but people who were attempting to control their emotional experience had much lower blood sugar levels compared to their own time 1 blood sugar and compared to the time 2 blood sugar levels of the group that was allowed to have their emotional experience as it was. So this mysterious magical resource that's being drained by our attempts to control the uncontrollable, namely our feelings, is blood sugar. Just the very basic fuel that our body and our brain needs in order to function at their best. So when we're getting into that fight, don't think about it, don't feel it, stop being anxious. We are wasting this fuel that is not available for things that otherwise would have been under our control, like maybe figuring how to solve that problem rather than spending all this energy and all those resources on figuring out how not to feel certain things. So when it comes to control, we have a choice. We can give up attempts to control the uncontrollable so that we're not wasting our resources and our energy, and place our efforts to control over things where we actually have control. Let's say, in a competition, we have no control over what other competitors are going to do, but we certainly have control over what we do. We may not have control over the environment in which the competition is taking place, but we have control over our own internal environment, as far as, preparing, feeding ourselves properly, getting enough sleep, etc., breathing. So we have to place our efforts to control over things that are actually controllable. And then what happens to a lot of people when they are trying to control their thoughts and emotions is, guess what? They get stuck, right? So the third principle of peak performance is the quicksand principle, or getting unstuck. Imagine that, you're walking around here in Brookline, suddenly you step into quicksand. And we all know what happens, right? You step into quicksand and you feel like, you're kind of getting stuck, right? Imagine you are stuck maybe up to your ankles. What's the first thing that you're going to try to do automatically? Try to get out, right? You're going to try to lift your foot out. And when you try to do that, by the effort to lift your foot out disturbs the quicksand. And quicksand is actually a mixture of sand and water. So when you try to get out, it disturbs that mixture, makes it more liquidy. So you sink some more. And in trying to lift your foot out, you are reducing the surface area of your body that's in contact with the quicksand, thereby increasing the pressure on the quicksand. And again, you sink some more. And that's how you end up getting stuck. Same thing happens with our difficult thoughts and emotions. When we first encounter anxiety, what's the first thing we automatically might want to do is, oh no, I must get rid of this. If we feel that, pre-performance activation, oh no, I must make this stop. But as we just talked about, that's not possible. We get stuck in a struggle with things that are not under our control. So the quicksand metaphor, is not mine. It's from, Stephen Hayes' Acceptance and Commitment Therapy. And I love this metaphor a whole lot. So when I first learned about it, I actually, went and researched quicksand. And there are some things about quicksand that, I didn't know about. For example, quicksand is actually not nearly as dangerous as we think it is. Right? And if we look at movies like Lawrence of Arabia and Princess Bride, where people vanish into quicksand, never to be seen again, that doesn't actually happen. Quicksand is rarely more than 2 to 3 feet deep. So for an adult human, it is impossible to drown in quicksand. But what is possible is to get stuck, right? We find ourselves in quicksand, we struggle, we get stuck. And then the danger is not the quicksand itself. The danger is the being stuck. It's being exposed to the elements, right? It's cold, it's snowing, there are white bears running around. There is no food. There is no water. It's the danger isn't getting stuck. And guess what? Our feelings work the same way. Our bodies are built for having all those feelings, fear, anxiety, sadness, anger, all those things we term negative emotions. They're actually quite useful and important, and our bodies are built for having them. So, again, they're not nearly as dangerous as we might think they are. So when we first encounter, fear or anger, and we try to get rid of them, we get stuck. So the danger is not in those emotions themselves. It's in the getting stuck, because when we're stuck in anger, when we're stuck in anxiety or fear, when we're stuck in sadness, that's when not such great things happen to our bodies. Right? Having some fear, having some sadness, having some anger leaves no long-term detrimental effects in our health. But chronic anger, chronic fear, chronic anxiety, that can end up in doing not such great things for our health long term. So it's the getting stuck. It's not the experience itself. And what do we do in order to get unstuck? We expose as much of our body, to the quicksand, right? So when we expand the surface area in contact with the quicksand, we reduce the pressure on the quicksand, and we can float. You know how you can float on seawater much better than fresh water? It's the same thing here. The quicksand is actually much more dense than seawater. So if you can float on seawater, you can float on quicksand even better. And then you can paddle to safety, you can be pulled to safety, etc. We can do the same thing with our feelings. We can let ourselves float through those feelings without getting stuck. And then we experience those feelings, and then we move on with no ill consequences and without getting stuck. Now, another thing that often happens when people, find themselves, having those, difficult emotions, again, very helpful, but very well-meaning, but ultimately not helpful advice is, oh, it's okay, just take a deep breath, right? How many of you have heard that one, right? Just take a deep breath. Well, I'm going to tell you principle number 4, do not take a deep breath. Instead, do low and slow breathing. And let me tell you why. The idea of take a deep breath is actually rooted in a very common misconception about breathing. Many people who take those deep breaths in order to feel better or in order to perform better are attempting to get more oxygen, right? Because we think that in order for us to be at our best, we got to get more oxygen. But guess what? At rest, I'm not talking about physical exertion. At rest, we don't need any more oxygen. We have plenty. At sea level or close to it, with healthy heart, healthy lungs, there is 21% oxygen that we're breathing in. There is about 15% oxygen in the air we're breathing out. So we're only using about a quarter of the oxygen that we are taking in. What we do need to think about is carbon dioxide. We have plenty of oxygen, but carbon dioxide, has a really bad rep out there, right? If you Google, carbon dioxide and human health, you're going to see all sorts of misinformation about it. It's toxic. It's, you must cleanse yourself of it. It's bad. You must get rid of it. That's actually not true at all. Carbon dioxide is crucial for proper distribution of oxygen. We must retain approximately 85 to 88% of our carbon dioxide in order for the oxygen that we have to get to where it needs to go. When we don't have enough carbon dioxide, the oxygen that's circulating in the bloodstream does not get released. And then our brains, our muscles, our organs end up oxygen deprived. So this behavior of overbreathing is something that is surprisingly easy to get into in an attempt to get more oxygen when you actually don't need to. So when we're taking those really big, deep breaths, right, and breathing it out really quickly, we take in more air than we can possibly use, right? So all that, air that we're taking in, we don't use any more of the oxygen because our metabolism hasn't changed, right? But we do breathe out more carbon dioxide just due to the volume of that breath that we took in. The same volume that comes in has to come out. So we're now breathing out more carbon dioxide than we're producing, and the levels of carbon dioxide in the blood fall. And now oxygen is not being released from the blood. And in an attempt to get more oxygen, we actually end up oxygen deprived, right? So this is a brain of a person in that overbreathing state, somebody who is trying to take big, deep breaths in order to get more oxygen. And, if you look at the picture, so on your right, I have a little bit of an issue with right and left. On your right, you see the brain with yellow and orange spots with lots of blood flow, right? That's a person breathing normally. And then that same person, the other side of the slide, the other brain is the person taking those big, deep, over-breathing breaths. And now you see blood flow greatly reduced. So with severe overbreathing, you can reduce the blood flow to the brain by 50, 60%. And this is very noticeable severe overbreathing. Your run-of-the-mill overbreathing, you might be reducing your blood flow to the brain by, say, 25%. Now imagine you're doing this preparing for a performance, right? Preparing for a competition, preparing for a speech, and your brain is at 75% capacity. That's certainly not going to help you do better, right? So again, don't take a deep breath. Because, when you overbreathe, look at all these symptoms that you experience. People feel lightheaded and tingly and short of breath, and your heart is pounding. Your mind gets fuzzy. It's really hard to focus. It's hard to think straight. It's hard to problem solve. What does all of this remind you of? Say it again. Anxiety. Yep. And specifically, perhaps a panic attack. Right. Yeah. So all these symptoms of overbreathing and symptoms of a panic attack are exactly the same. And there's a good reason for it, because every panic attack involves, overbreathing, that whole cascade that I described of depriving ourselves of carbon dioxide and as a result being deprived of oxygen. And how many of you have had the experience where you feel anxious, but there is absolutely no reason to be anxious? You just kind of, I'm feeling anxious and I don't know why. There is nothing to be afraid of. Nothing's happening. Yeah, quite a few. So what often happens is your breathing gets disturbed and you experience these symptoms. And guess what? Your brain that is trained to interpret sensations will jump to the first available conclusion, which is I'm anxious. And now you have a different interpretation to hopefully provide, to your mind when you feel those sensations and don't have a particularly good explanation for them. You might simply be overbreathing through a disruption to the mechanics of your breath. So instead of deep breathing, when you would like to perhaps reduce the intensity of the situation, when you'd like to feel a little bit more balanced, maybe you'd like to give yourself a little bit of a break. Instead of taking deep breaths, I'm going to suggest low and slow breathing. And we're going to practice that together for a moment. I'll explain, and then we'll practice. We're going to shift the breath from the chest to the belly, right? That's the low part. And then we're going to slow down the rate of breathing. That's the slow part. And then we're going to breathe in a normal size inhalation through the nose as if you're smelling a flower. And then we're going to breathe out slowly and fully so that your exhalation is a bit longer than your inhalation through the nose or pursed lips as if you're blowing out a candle. So there is no need to emphasize the depth of a breath. Shifting the breath to the belly will naturally deepen your breath a little bit, enough to compensate for the fact that you're now breathing slower. So there's absolutely no need to instruct yourself to take a deep breath. Your body will take care of it all for you. Your body knows exactly what to do. So let's try it. Taking a normal sized breath in through the nose, letting the air go into your belly. And then exhaling slowly. As if you're blowing out a candle. How does that feel? Feels nice, right? And there is much less danger of overbreathing. I'm not saying you can never take a deep breath. Sometimes a very, very deep breath feels good. But just know that if you're taking a very big breath in, you're going to have to breathe out super slowly in order to make that breath a healthy one. So I can show you what a healthy, deep breath would look like, and think about if that's what typically happens when people take deep breaths. Right? So I'm going to take a big breath in. I could keep going a little more, but you get the point, right? When we take a very big breath in order for that breath to be healthy, we got to exhale for so much longer than most people do. And importantly, a lot of people actually can't, especially in a stressful situation when your breathing is already, kind of faster and your body is trying to drive your breath faster. If you take a deep breath and a fast breath, that's an excellent way to overbreathe and feel super unhappy, just dizzy and lightheaded and feeling like you can't catch your breath. So breathe low and slow instead, and you're going to minimize your chances of creating a problem, but rather you'll maximize your chances of helping your body regulate. Now, principle number 5, the agility principle, and that's achieving greater agility and self-regulation through heart rate variability training. So let's talk a bit about heart rate variability. The simple definition is, it is the variation in the time interval that passes from one heartbeat to the next. So if you were to take your pulse on your wrist, on your neck, you would feel a thump, 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 right? Each one of those thumps is a heartbeat. And if you were to count those thumps, you would probably count somewhere between 60 and 80 of them. That is your heart rate. But the time that passes from one heartbeat to the next is actually changing all the time. So we can see that here. All those are spikes. This is a EKG, so somewhat simulated EKG display. Each one of those R spikes is a heartbeat. That's the contraction of the left ventricle of your heart, sending oxygenated blood out to the body. And on the EKG, it's represented as that R spike. And that's what you feel as that thump, when you take your pulse. So the time that passes from beat 1 to beat 2, 882 milliseconds. The one after that, 923 milliseconds. The one after that, 983 milliseconds. So the heartbeats are coming further apart, meaning that your heart rate is slowing down, right? And then the heartbeats start coming closer together. The interbeat intervals become faster, 789 milliseconds, 674 milliseconds, right? So your heart rate is speeding up. Your heart is doing that all the time. It's speeding up, slowing down, speeding up, slowing down. We can actually calculate an instantaneous heart rate for each one of these intervals. So if your heart were to beat with 882 millisecond intervals at all times, your heart rate would be 68 beats per minute. If your heart were to beat with 789 millisecond intervals at all times, your heart rate would be 76 beats per minute. So for each one of those interbeat intervals, we calculate an instantaneous heart rate. And it's that instantaneous heart rate that's speeding up and slowing down, speeding up and slowing down, kind of would look like this. So the top part of the slide is a raw EKG. And on the bottom is a display of instantaneous heart rate. You can see if I can, there we go. You can see that these intervals are a little bit longer than these intervals right here, right? And the heart rate is slowing down as the heart rate, as the interbeat intervals are further apart, right? The heart rate is slowing down. And as the heartbeats come closer together, the heart rate is speeding up. So this is heart rate variability. Heart rate coming up and coming down, coming up and coming down. And it's doing that all the time, moment to moment, breath to breath. Your heart rate is coming up and slowing down, and you want that. Greater heart rate variability is associated with better cardiovascular health, better physical health, better psychophysiological health, and better performance. So the function of heart rate variability is to reflect our physiological capacity to land in that sweet spot of activation. When our heart rate variability is optimized, so is the ability of the nervous system to reach optimal activation, enabling optimal performance. Higher heart rate variability strengthens the ability of the parasympathetic nervous system in regulating overall activation, right? Your sympathetic nervous system doesn't have a shut-off mechanism, it just goes up. And it is the job of the parasympathetic nervous system to come on and put on the brakes to sympathetic activation, and then as needed, take its foot off the brake and allow sympathetic activation to increase. Again, with performance, that exactly, we need a very strong parasympathetic nervous system in order to regulate our overall activation for whatever it is that we need. So the question that might come up is, well, our heart beats on its own, it's coming up and coming down, why do we need to do anything about it? Why do we need to train heart rate variability? Is it critical for the function, for your body to function? Well, no. But is it critical for your body to function at its best? Yes. And the best way to think about it is if you think about a digital SLR camera, those big fancy cameras with a bunch of buttons and controls on them, right? Many of these cameras also have an auto function. And you can take that fancy camera, put it on auto, point and shoot, and you're going to get pictures. And those pictures are going to be pretty good. And they might be good enough much of the time. But what if you wanted to take really good pictures? Then you got to learn, how to adjust the aperture and the shutter speed and focus, right? And then you can take really good pictures. Something similar happens with our heart rate variability. We can let the body do its thing, and it's going to do it well enough much of the time. But if we want to be at our best as much of the time as possible, then learning to fidget with those internal controls through heart rate variability will help us be at our best as much of the time as possible. Now, you don't have to take my word for it. Heart rate variability training and the importance of heart rate variability are well established in the literature. Now, I will absolutely run out of time if I delve deeply into that research. This is why there are references to all of this, and I'm happy to share, full references, actual papers, please just let me know. I'm happy to do that. So I will just briefly say that, heart rate variability is incredibly important in our cardiovascular health. So the Framingham Heart Study, the research coming out of that shows that HRV is a better predictor of long-term cardiovascular health than blood pressure, cholesterol levels, and resting heart rate. Right, all those things that we get measured in the doctor's office during the physical, not HRV, but all those other things get measured. And HRV is actually a better predictor than all that. HRV is a great predictor of resilience, our ability to respond to stress in healthy ways. And it is a predictor of optimal performance, both athletically and cognitively. And it's also a predictor of our psychophysiological health. So, things like anxiety and depression and response to trauma and high blood pressure and pain and things like that. Since we're talking about specifically peak performance, here you go. Again, a whole bunch of research. I will not go into detail, but on the one side, you have all the specific areas of performance where we know that HRV training is helpful. And on the other side are elements of performance that are improved with heart rate variability training, endurance, reaction speed, recovery time, problem solving, et cetera. And again, happy to share any of that research with you. Heart rate variability is a well-established biomarker of self-regulation. We can, if we measure our heart rate variability on a daily basis, we can establish a baseline. We know where we are. We know how our body is functioning. We know how our body is able to self-regulate on any given day. And then we're able to predict, is this a day where I can put myself in front of a really big challenge? Or maybe today is a day where I need a little bit extra self-care. Right, so it can give us some guidance for how to handle ourselves that day. Or if you're waking up in the morning with slightly lower heart rate variability, and you have a big performance, and you have no choice about that, that maybe that's the day where you are going to take a little extra time. Maybe you're going to, eat an extra good breakfast, or maybe you're going to take some extra breaks. You're going to need to pay attention to how you're doing internally in order to be at your best. And then we can also improve heart rate variability with biofeedback training. We can learn to breathe only for certain periods of time at 6 breaths per minute. That will get us closest to something called resonance frequency breathing. Not going to get into the details of that, but resonance frequency breathing is an optimal breathing rate that will maximize those oscillations of your heart rate. And if if you have a way of determining it, that's great. That will actually facilitate your training further. But if there is not a way to determine your resonance frequency breathing, you can just breathe at 6 breaths per minute. 4 seconds in, 6 seconds out for 20 minutes a day. And you're going to improve over time, say 6-ish weeks of training. You're going to improve your heart rate variability, and you're going to improve whatever elements of performance you're looking for. So we can take a moment and practice our 6 breaths per minute breathing. As the ball goes up, breathing in through the nose as if you're smelling a flower. As the ball goes down, exhale as if you're blowing out a candle. Pretty simple. Daily practice, ideally 20 minutes a day, but most people will need a bit of a ramp up to that, right? So 5 minutes a day for the first week, 10 minutes a day for the second week, 15 minutes a day for the third, 20 minutes by the 4th week.
Then 20 minutes consecutive.
Ideally. You can break it up, but you're going to get more bang for your buck if you do it consecutively. Yeah. And there are some apps that will help you do that. That will measure your heart variability, can help you keep track of progress and do biofeedback practice. Now, the final principle is called FLAIR, to help you remember the skills. So FLAIR is an acronym that I came up with based on all that research that I've kind of synthesized, for you in the last, 40 minutes or so. So FLAIR stands for feel, label, allow, respond, and expand awareness. This is a way to respond to difficult experience. It gives you a nice structured way that works in pretty much any challenging situation. If you do this, practice under very low stress conditions first, and then you'll be able to do this quickly under much more challenging conditions. So feel is just becoming aware of the difficult sensation. This is pre-verbal awareness, sensory, nonverbal. You become aware that something is happening. Label, non-judgmental, descriptive name for your experience. Uncertainty, unhelpful thinking, discomfort. You can call it whatever you want. You don't have to be terribly precise. You don't need to sit there and figure out, is this anxiety? Is this fear? Is this nervousness? You don't need to do that. Just close enough that it's precise enough, but also, without getting into dramatic details. Thank you. Through labeling, we're actually changing the neurological pathways that are happening in the brain at that moment. When we first experience a difficult emotion, say fear, the fight or flight center of the brain, the amygdala, becomes highly activated, right? We know this from imaging studies. And the prefrontal cortex, the thinking part of the brain, becomes much less activated. And this is why we often find ourselves doing or saying things we did not mean to say or do, because the amygdala is driving the bus, right? And the prefrontal cortex is not able to exert its influence. So through this very simple skill of giving a name, giving a label to the experience, we're reversing that neurological pathway. Again, we know this from imaging studies. When we give a name, a label to our experience, the prefrontal cortex activation increases, the amygdala activation decreases, and now we're much more in control of our actions. The particular parts of the prefrontal cortex that become more highly activated are the ones that are responsible for choice of action and emotion regulation. Exactly what we need in those challenging situations. So, descriptive, non-judgmental name for your experience. Then the third step is allowing your experience to be as it is, allowing your thoughts, allowing your feelings to be as they are. Practically, what do you say? It's okay to feel this way. It's okay to think this. Because remember the white bear and the tears, right? Can't control that. So attempts to control our experience will not lead us to anything but wasting our blood sugar. So it doesn't matter if you think you should be feeling this way. It doesn't matter if you think that you're overreacting, or if somebody else tells you you're overreacting, or if you think that somebody else will feel differently. None of that matters. Your experience is your experience. Nothing you could do about it. Your best bet is to let it be, so that you're not wasting your resources, but rather conserving those resources and making them available for the next step, which is responding to the present situation. This is where you choose what is under your control. You're choosing a response that's most helpful. You're moving away from the unhelpful automatic reaction. What's in my best interest right now? And what is under my control? So one thing that you could absolutely do, and maybe that's the first step of your response, is breathe low and slow at 6 breaths per minute, the way we practiced. It will decrease the intensity of the situation. You've already set yourself up for optimizing your response, right? You've changed the neurological pathway in your brain. So now your thinking part of the brain is more in control rather than the amygdala. You freed up your resources for figuring out what to do in this situation. And now the breathing will also help re-regulate you, right? So this is, you will produce more helpful oxygen CO2 balance, and you will activate your parasympathetic nervous system, your vagal nerve, in producing most helpful physiological activation, helping your body get to that sweet spot of activation. You're going to prepare yourself for that. And then you're going to figure out, well, what do I actually do? Right? Sometimes the situation is going to need some specific solution that is unique to that situation. You would have set yourself up to be in the best possible position to come up with the most helpful response. And then finally is expand awareness, E for expand awareness. You can do this in conjunction with your response. This idea is to remove the sharp focus on the difficult, and instead allow your experience to be broader, so that this difficult experience is no longer all of your experience, but rather just a part of it. Let's do a very quick demo together. If you have a piece of paper or even like your phone or computer screen with something written on it, take it and hold it really close to your face, almost touching your nose. And tell me what you see. A little louder. What do you see? Yep, yep. Can you tell what's written on there? Yeah, can you really make sense of what's going on? No, right? And now take that paper or phone or whatever and hold it, just put it on your lap, hold it further away. What do you see now? Can you read what's written? Yeah. What else do you see? Thank you. Yep, you see everybody around you. Yep, you see the sky outside, you see the ceiling, you see the people around, you see me, right? So you're now aware of the full experience. When when that difficult experience is right up in your nose, it doesn't help, right? It might feel like, oh, I'm super focused on it, but no, you can't make sense of it, right? You can't problem solve in that situation. When all of your experience is this bad problem, you can't, it's much more difficult to figure out your way out of it. So if you expand the awareness, suddenly there's all this other stuff going on. And yes, the problem is still there. It did not change in any way, but it is no longer all of your experience. It's just sitting there. But there is this problem. But there is also the people around you, somebody you can ask for help, and maybe your nose is a little itchy, and there's all sorts of other stuff going on. So it's much easier to implement that chosen helpful response. And that's all I had to share with you today. I hope you go and practice, and we even have some time for questions.